The fluorescent lights in courtroom 3B felt like they were burning holes through my skull as I sat there, watching my husband Trevor lean back in his chair with that smug smile I'd grown to hate. 3 years of marriage, and I was finally seeing him for who he really was, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen next. Your Honor, Trevor's lawyer, Michael Cross, stood up with his expensive suit and slicked back hair. My client has been more than patient during these proceedings. Mrs. Blackwood has been trying to hide assets and deny my client his rightful share of the marital estate. I felt my stomach twist. Mrs. Blackwood. I'd kept my maiden name, Martinez, for my business, but legally I was still tied to this man who was about to destroy everything I'd worked for. Judge Patricia Henley, a stern woman in her late 50s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, looked over her glasses at the papers in front of her. Mr. Cross, please present your client's final demands to the court. Trevor stood up slowly, and I could see that familiar gleam in his eyes, the same look he got when he was about to close a big investment deal, except this time I was the deal. Your Honor, Trevor's voice carried across the silent courtroom, I'm not asking for anything unreasonable here. California is a community property state. I'm simply requesting what's legally mine. Half of everything acquired during our marriage. He turned to look directly at me, and that's when his expression changed into something almost evil. That includes half of Isabella's tech company, which is now worth approximately $15 million. It also includes half of her grandmother's estate, which she inherited 2 years ago. Another $8 million in properties and antiques. My hands clenched into fists under the table. My grandmother's estate. The woman who raised me after my parents died, who taught me everything about strength and independence. Trevor wanted to take half of her legacy too. But then Trevor did something that made my blood run cold. He started laughing. Not just a chuckle or a smirk. A full, loud laugh that echoed through the courtroom like he'd just heard the funniest joke in the world. I mean, come on, he said between laughs, looking around the courtroom like he was performing for an audience. I'm taking half her millions, including her grandmother's estate, and there's nothing she can do about it. The law's on my side. The courtroom erupted. People in the gallery started whispering loudly. Someone gasped. I heard my lawyer, Rebecca Stone, mutter something under her breath that sounded like a curse word. Judge Henley banged her gavel hard. Order! Order in my courtroom! But Trevor kept laughing, his head thrown back like this was the best day of his life. Sorry, Your Honor, but this is just too easy. I married well, didn't I? That's when something inside me snapped. Not anger. I was beyond anger. It was something colder, calmer. I'd been sitting there for weeks, listening to him and his lawyer paint me as some greedy wife trying to hide money from her poor, deserving husband. I'd watched him lie about supporting my business, about being a loving partner, about deserving half of everything my grandmother left me. But I had something Trevor didn't know about, something that was going to change everything. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. The courtroom went quiet except for Trevor's dying laughter. Every eye in the room was on me as I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope. My heels clicked against the floor as I walked toward Judge Henley's bench. Trevor's laughter stopped completely. I could feel his eyes burning into my back, probably wondering what I was doing. I handed the envelope to Judge Henley with steady hands, even though my heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Your Honor, I said, my voice clear and strong, I think you need to check again. Judge Henley took the envelope, her eyebrows raised in curiosity. She opened it carefully and began reading the documents inside. I watched her face change from confusion to surprise to something that looked almost like amusement. She looked up at Trevor, then back down at the papers, then up at Trevor again. And then Judge Patricia Henley did something I'd never seen a judge do in a courtroom before. She burst out laughing. 3 years earlier, I never imagined I'd end up in a divorce courtroom watching a judge laugh at my soon-to-be ex-husband. Back then, I thought I was living in a fairy tale. It was October 15th, 2021, at the Children's Hospital Charity Gala in downtown San Francisco. I remember the date because it was exactly 1 week after I'd sold my first app, Study Buddy, to a major education company for $2 million. At 28, I was finally seeing my dreams come true. I was standing by the silent auction table, bidding on a weekend getaway to Napa Valley, when someone tapped me on the shoulder. "Excuse me, aren't you Isabella Martinez, the app developer who just made the cover of Tech Weekly?" I turned around and felt my breath catch. The man standing behind me was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair perfectly styled and the kind of smile that belonged in a toothpaste commercial. He was wearing a navy blue suit that probably cost more than most people's rent, and his watch caught the light from the chandeliers above us. "That's me," I said, trying not to sound as nervous as I felt. Though I'm surprised anyone recognizes me from that photo. They made me look way more professional than I actually am. He laughed, and it was warm and genuine. Nothing like the cold laughter I'd hear in that courtroom years later. "Trevor Blackwood," he said, extending his hand. "I work at Sterling Investment Group downtown. I've been following your company's progress for months. What you've built is incredible." We shook hands, and I noticed his grip was firm but not aggressive. His eyes were this amazing shade of green, and when he looked at me, it felt like I was the only person in the room. "You've been following my little app company?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Most people think educational apps are boring." "Are you kidding? You've revolutionized how kids study. My nephew uses Study Buddy every day for his math homework. His grades went from C's to A's in 2 months. The way he talked about my work made my heart flutter. Most guys I'd dated either didn't understand my business or felt threatened by my success. But Trevor seemed genuinely impressed and interested. We spent the entire evening talking. He told me about his work helping companies grow their investments, about his dreams of starting his own firm someday. I told him about my plans for my next app, about how I wanted to help kids all over the world learn better. "You know what I love most about what you do?" he said, as we walked out to the valet stand together. "You're not just building apps to make money. You actually care about making a difference." When he asked for my number, I didn't hesitate. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd met someone who truly understood me. Our first official date was at this tiny Italian restaurant in North Beach. Trevor showed up with a single white rose and pulled out my chair like a perfect gentleman. We talked for 4 hours straight, and I found myself sharing things I'd never told anyone, like how scared I was that my success was just luck, or how lonely it got working 16-hour days building my company. "Isabella," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand, "what you've accomplished isn't luck. You're brilliant, and you work harder than anyone I know. Don't let anyone, including yourself, make you think otherwise." The next 6 months felt like something out of a romantic movie. Trevor would surprise me with lunch deliveries when I was working late. He'd send flowers to my office with notes that said things like, "For the woman who's changing the world, one app at a time." He even learned basic coding so he could understand my work better. When my second app, Math Magic, started gaining traction, Trevor was my biggest cheerleader. He'd brag about me to his colleagues, introduce me as his brilliant girlfriend who's going to be the next tech billionaire. On our 8-month anniversary, he proposed at the same charity gala where we'd met. He got down on one knee right there in front of everyone, with a ring that sparkled like a small star. "Isabella Martinez," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "You've made me believe in dreams again. Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life supporting yours?" Through happy tears, I said yes, thinking I was the luckiest woman alive. I had no idea I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. 2 years into our marriage, I should have been the happiest woman alive. Instead, I was starting to feel like a stranger in my own life. It all began when Math Magic exploded beyond my wildest dreams. What started as a simple app to help kids with multiplication tables suddenly had 5 million downloads in 3 months. Educational companies were calling daily with partnership offers. My bank account went from comfortable to absolutely mind-blowing, $15 million and growing every week. Trevor seemed thrilled at first. He'd pop champagne when we hit new milestones and tell everyone at dinner parties how proud he was of his genius wife. But something subtle started changing in the way he looked at me, like he was calculating something behind those green eyes I'd once found so charming. The first red flag came when he suggested we reorganize our finances for tax purposes. He convinced me to add his name to several business accounts, saying it would make things easier for filing joint returns. I trusted him completely. After all, he was the investment expert, and I was just a programmer who got lucky. "Babe, you're amazing at creating apps, but business management isn't your strong suit," he'd say with that charming smile. "Let me handle the boring financial stuff so you can focus on what you do best." Then, 3 months later, my world shifted again when Grandma Elena passed away. My grandmother had been my rock after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. She raised me in her beautiful Victorian house in Pacific Heights, teaching me that a woman should never depend on anyone else for her security. She'd built her own real estate empire back in the 1960s, when women weren't supposed to do such things. When her lawyer read the will, I nearly fainted. Grandma Elena had left me everything. Her house worth $4 million, 2 rental properties worth another $3 million, and her collection of antique jewelry and art worth over $1 million more. $8 million total, all because she believed I was the only one in the family who understood the value of independence. I cried for hours that night, not just from grief, but from gratitude. Even in death, my grandmother was still taking care of me. Trevor's reaction was strange. "8 million?" he said, his eyes lighting up in a way that made me uncomfortable. "Isabella, do you realize what this means? We're set for life. We could buy that house in Marin County, get the yacht I've been looking at, maybe even start that investment firm I've always dreamed about." "We?" I asked quietly. "Trevor, this was my grandmother's legacy. She worked her whole life for these properties." His face darkened for just a second before the smile returned. "Of course, babe. I just meant we're a team now. Your success is my success, right? That's what marriage means." But his behavior started changing in ways that made my stomach twist with worry. He began making expensive purchases without asking me first. A $60,000 sports car, a Rolex collection, designer suits that cost more than most people's monthly salary. When I questioned him about it, he'd get defensive. "Isabella, I'm not some charity case you picked up off the street. I have my own career, my own money. Besides, we're married. What's yours is mine, and what's mine is yours." Except I noticed it was always my money being spent. The worst part was when I discovered he'd been meeting with financial advisors behind my back. I found business cards in his jacket pocket from wealth management firms, estate planning lawyers, and something called high-asset divorce specialists that made my blood run cold. When I confronted him about it, he laughed it off. "Babe, you're being paranoid. I'm just trying to make sure we're protected. With this much money, we need proper legal and financial planning. I'm looking out for us." But the way he said us didn't feel like partnership anymore. It felt like ownership. I started noticing other things too. How he'd steer conversations away from my work when we were with his colleagues. How he'd interrupt me during business calls to offer his input. How he'd gotten angry when I refused to make him a partner in my company. "I've been supporting your dreams for 3 years," he'd said during one particularly heated argument. "I think I've earned the right to be more than just your cheerleader." The man I'd fallen in love with was disappearing, replaced by someone who looked at me like I was a business opportunity rather than his wife. I just didn't realize how far he was willing to go to cash in. The truth hit me like a freight train on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 2 years and 4 months into our marriage. I'd been working late in my home office, debugging code for my newest app, when I realized I'd left my laptop charger at the main office downtown. Trevor had already left for work, so I decided to surprise him with lunch and grab my charger at the same time. Sterling Investment Group occupied the 20th floor of a gleaming downtown tower. I'd been there dozens of times for company parties and client dinners, so the receptionist waved me through with a smile. "He's in conference room B with a client," she said cheerfully, "but I'm sure he won't mind if you peek in." I walked down the familiar hallway, carrying a bag of Trevor's favorite Thai food, actually excited to see the look on his face when I surprised him. The conference room had glass walls, and I could see Trevor inside, but he wasn't with a client. He was with Amanda Chen, a stunning investment analyst who worked on his team, and they weren't discussing portfolios. Trevor had Amanda pressed against the conference table, his hands tangled in her long black hair, kissing her like his life depended on it. She was laughing between kisses, running her fingers down his chest, completely comfortable with the intimacy between them. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a first-time mistake. The way they moved together, the casual familiarity of their touches, this had been going on for a long time. I stood there frozen, watching my husband betray our marriage in broad daylight, in his workplace, where anyone could see. The Thai food slipped from my hands and crashed to the floor, the sound echoing through the hallway. Trevor's head snapped up, and our eyes met through the glass. For a split second, I saw panic flash across his face. Then, incredibly, he smiled and gently pushed Amanda away. I turned and ran. I made it to my car before the tears started, great heaving sobs that shook my entire body. 3 years of my life. 3 years of believing I'd found my soulmate, my partner, my future. All of it built on lies. Trevor came home that evening acting like nothing had happened. He walked into our kitchen, loosened his tie, and kissed my cheek like he had every day for the past 2 years. "Hey babe, how was your day? You look tired." I stared at him, this man I'd shared my bed with, my dreams with, my grandmother's legacy with. "I saw you today, Trevor." His face didn't change. No guilt, no shame, no remorse, just a slight tightening around his eyes. "Saw me where?" "With Amanda, in conference room B." Trevor sighed and sat down at our kitchen island like we were discussing what to have for dinner. "Isabella, you're overreacting. Amanda and I work closely together. Sometimes things get complicated in high-stress environments." "Complicated?" My voice cracked. "You were kissing her like you love her." "I love you," he said, but his tone was flat, mechanical. "Amanda is just... She understands the pressure I'm under. You're always so busy with your apps, your company. A man has needs." The casual cruelty of his words hit me harder than if he'd slapped me. "So this is my fault? Because I work hard?" Trevor's mask finally slipped, and I saw something cold and calculating underneath. "Look, Isabella, let's be honest here. This marriage has been good for both of us. You got a husband who supports your career, and I got a lot of things." "What's that supposed to mean?" He stood up and walked to our wine fridge, pulling out a bottle like we were having a normal conversation. "It means I've invested 3 years of my life in this relationship. I've been the supportive husband, the cheerleader, the guy who puts your dreams first. I think I've earned some compensation for that investment." My blood turned to ice. "Compensation? Isabella, you're worth over $20 million now. Your grandmother's estate alone is worth $8 million. I've been part of building this life with you. I deserve my fair share." "Your fair share of what? My inheritance? My work?" Trevor poured himself a glass of wine and took a slow sip. "California is a community property state, babe. What's acquired during marriage gets split 50-50. That includes business growth and inheritances." I realized with growing horror that this wasn't a confession or an apology. This was a negotiation. "You planned this," I whispered. "All of it." Trevor smiled, and it was nothing like the warm smile that had made me fall in love with him 3 years ago. "I plan to be successful, and I am." The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a courier who looked apologetic as he handed me the thick manila envelope. I'd been expecting them for 2 weeks, ever since Trevor moved out of our house and into what I later learned was Amanda's downtown condo. But seeing Blackwood versus Blackwood printed in bold letters across the top still felt like a punch to the stomach. Trevor had hired Michael Cross, and now I understood why that name had made my lawyer Rebecca Stone's face go pale when I mentioned it. Cross was famous in San Francisco legal circles for one thing: destroying wealthy women in divorce court. He's represented 3 tech executives' ex-husbands in the past 5 years, Rebecca explained during our first strategy meeting. Each time, he walked away with settlements that made headlines. We're not just fighting Trevor here, Isabella. We're fighting a machine designed to take everything you've worked for. The demands laid out in Trevor's filing were breathtaking in their audacity. He wanted half of my company, valued at $15 million, half of my grandmother's estate, worth $8 million, half of all assets acquired during our marriage, including my investment accounts, my car, even my grandmother's antique jewelry collection. But the worst part was how his lawyer painted the story. According to their filing, Trevor had been the supportive spouse who sacrificed his own career advancement to help build the marital estate. They claimed he'd provided crucial emotional support and business guidance that directly contributed to my success. They argued that my apps only became profitable because of Trevor's investment expertise and networking connections. It was all lies, but they were lies wrapped in legal language that made them sound believable. The most dangerous part, Rebecca warned me, is the inheritance claim. Normally, inherited assets remain separate property, but they're arguing that since you inherited your grandmother's estate during the marriage, and since Trevor helped manage and improve those properties, he's entitled to half. He never managed anything, I protested. He barely even visited my grandmother's house. I know that, and you know that. But Cross is good at creating narratives that sound convincing to judges who don't know the real story. The depositions were a nightmare. Cross grilled me for 8 hours straight, trying to make me admit that Trevor had contributed to my business success. He twisted every conversation, every dinner party where Trevor had introduced me to potential clients, every time Trevor had given me advice about anything. Isn't it true, Mrs. Blackwood, that your husband's connections in the financial industry helped you secure the partnership deal with Educational Enterprises? No, that's not true. I got that deal because my app had 5 million downloads. But didn't your husband arrange the initial meeting with Educational Enterprises' CEO at a charity function? He introduced us at a party, but... So you admit your husband facilitated the connection that led to your most profitable contract? It went on like that for hours. Cross was skilled at taking tiny grains of truth and building mountains of lies around them. Meanwhile, Trevor played his part perfectly. During his own deposition, he painted himself as the devoted husband who'd put his own ambitions on hold to support my dreams. I could have started my own investment firm years ago, he said, dabbing at his eyes with a tissue. But Isabella needed me. Her business was growing so fast she was overwhelmed. I spent countless nights helping her strategize, reviewing contracts, making connections. I believed we were building something together. When Cross asked about the inheritance, Trevor's performance was Oscar-worthy. Elena was like a grandmother to me, too. I spent holidays with her, helped Isabella manage the properties after Elena passed. I even coordinated the renovations on the Pacific Heights house that increased its value by $600,000. Another lie. Trevor had hired contractors and paid them with my money, but he'd never lifted a finger himself. The worst moment came when Cross presented evidence of Trevor's contributions, emails where I'd thanked him for his support, photos of us at business events, even a recording of me introducing him as my partner in everything at a company celebration. Everything I'd said out of love was being used as a weapon against me. Mrs. Blackwood, Cross said with a satisfied smile, isn't it true that you yourself acknowledged your husband as an equal partner in your success? Sitting in that sterile conference room, watching my own words being twisted into chains to bind me, I felt more alone than I had since my parents died. Trevor was going to win, and we both knew it. 3 weeks before our final court hearing, Rebecca Stone walked into my office with a look I'd never seen before. Part determination, part barely contained excitement. Isabella, I need you to trust me on something, she said, closing the door behind her. I want to hire a private investigator. I looked up from the financial documents I'd been reviewing for the 100th time, trying to find some angle Cross hadn't already covered. Rebecca, we've been through this. We can't afford to look vindictive. The judge already thinks I'm trying to hide assets. This isn't about vindictiveness. It's about survival. She sat down across from my desk, her usually perfect composure cracking slightly. Isabella, I've been practicing family law for 20 years. I've seen men like Trevor before, and they don't just wake up one day and decide to destroy their wives. This is a pattern. Something in her tone made me put down my papers. What do you mean? I mean, Trevor Blackwood is too good at this. The way he positioned himself in your life, the timing of when he started changing, how perfectly he's playing the victim in court. It's like he's done this before. Rebecca pulled out a business card and slid it across my desk. Patricia Reeves. She's the best investigator in the city, specializes in financial fraud and matrimonial cases. If Trevor has secrets, she'll find them. I stared at the card, feeling a flicker of something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. How much will this cost? Everything we have left in the legal budget. But, Isabella, if I'm right about Trevor, this could save everything you've worked for. Patricia Reeves looked nothing like the private investigators in movies. She was a small woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She looked more like a librarian than someone who uncovered people's darkest secrets. I'll need access to everything, she told us during our first meeting. Bank records, credit reports, employment history, social media accounts, and I'll need you to tell me everything about how you met, how your relationship developed, every detail you can remember. For the next 2 weeks, Patricia worked like a woman possessed. She traced Trevor's employment history, interviewed his former colleagues, even tracked down his college roommates. Meanwhile, I tried to focus on preparing for court, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. Then, on a Friday afternoon, Patricia called Rebecca with 4 words that changed everything. You need to see this. We met at Rebecca's office that evening. Patricia had spread documents across the conference table like pieces of a puzzle, and the picture they formed made my stomach turn. Trevor Blackwood has done this twice before, Patricia announced without preamble. She pointed to a photograph of a beautiful blonde woman. Meet Jennifer Walsh, tech executive from Seattle, married Trevor in 2018, divorced in 2019. She was worth $12 million when they met, $4 million when they divorced. My hands started shaking. What happened to the other $8 million? Trevor happened. Patricia pulled out another set of documents. He convinced her to add his name to business accounts, just like he did with you. Then he systematically drained them while building a case that he deserved half of everything in the divorce. The second photograph showed a brunette with sad eyes. Lisa Chen, pharmaceutical heiress from Portland, married Trevor in 2016, divorced in 2017. She inherited $20 million from her father during their marriage. Guess how much she had left after the divorce? $10 million, I whispered. $8 million. Trevor got $12 million total. His half of the inheritance plus compensation for emotional distress caused by Lisa's workaholic tendencies. Rebecca was furiously taking notes. How did he get away with this? Why didn't anyone catch the pattern? Because he's smart, Patricia said grimly. He changes cities, changes his approach slightly each time, and he targets women who are too successful and too trusting. Women who believe in love more than they believe in protecting themselves. But Patricia wasn't finished. She pulled out a thick folder that made my heart race. The best part is what I found about his current activities. Trevor hasn't just been stealing your money, Isabella. He's been actively embezzling from your business accounts for the past 18 months. She spread out bank statements and transaction records. $2.3 million moved through a series of shell companies that all trace back to accounts controlled by Trevor and Amanda Chen. Amanda's involved? I gasped. Up to her neck. She's been helping him launder the money through fake investment opportunities. They've been planning this for over a year. Rebecca looked up from her notes, and for the first time in months she was smiling. Isabella, we don't just have a defense anymore. We have a nuclear weapon. The silence in the courtroom was deafening as Judge Henley finished reading the documents from my envelope. Trevor had stopped laughing completely, his face now the color of old newspaper. His lawyer, Michael Cross, was frantically whispering in his ear, but Trevor seemed frozen in place. Judge Henley set the papers down carefully and removed her glasses, cleaning them slowly while the entire courtroom held its breath. When she put them back on, her expression had transformed from amused to absolutely furious. "Mr. Cross," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "I suggest you advise your client to remain seated and quiet for what I'm about to say." She turned to face Trevor directly, and I watched him shrink back in his chair like a child caught stealing cookies. "Mr. Blackwood, in 30 years on this bench, I have seen many cases of marital misconduct. But what I'm holding here represents one of the most calculated and cruel schemes I've ever encountered." Judge Henley held up the first document. "This is a detailed financial investigation showing that you have systematically embezzled $2.3 million from your wife's business accounts over the past 18 months, money that you moved through shell companies registered under false names." Trevor's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Your Honor, I can explain." "You will remain silent." Judge Henley's voice boomed through the courtroom. "I'm not finished." She picked up the second set of documents. "This investigation also reveals that you have committed this exact same fraud against two previous wives, Jennifer Walsh of Seattle and Lisa Chen of Portland, both successful businesswomen. Both left financially devastated after divorcing you." The gallery behind us erupted in shocked whispers. I heard someone gasp, "Oh my God," and another person mutter, "What a monster." "Furthermore," Judge Henley continued, "the evidence shows that your accomplice, Amanda Chen, helped you establish these fraudulent accounts and has been receiving payments from the stolen funds. Ms. Chen is currently being arrested at her workplace as we speak." Trevor's face went from pale to green. He looked like he might throw up right there in the courtroom. Judge Henley stood up, her black robes making her look like an avenging angel. "Mr. Blackwood, not only will you receive nothing from this divorce, but you are hereby ordered to pay Mrs. Martinez restitution in the amount of $2.3 million for the funds you stole, plus an additional $2 million in punitive damages for fraud and emotional distress. Your Honor, please—" Trevor tried to stand, but his lawyer yanked him back down. "I'm still not finished," Judge Henley said coldly. "Mrs. Martinez will retain full ownership of her business, her grandmother's estate, and all marital assets. You, Mr. Blackwood, will leave this marriage with exactly what you brought into it, nothing." She picked up her gavel, and I could see Trevor flinching in anticipation. "Additionally, I am ordering that copies of this evidence be forwarded immediately to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. Mr. Blackwood, you are looking at charges of grand theft, fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy." The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. "This court is adjourned. Bailiff, please escort Mr. Blackwood into custody pending arraignment on criminal charges." Everything happened so fast after that. Two bailiffs approached Trevor, who had gone completely limp in his chair. As they helped him stand and began reading him his rights, he turned to look at me one last time. The arrogance was completely gone. In its place was something that looked almost like fear, mixed with a desperate kind of confusion, like he couldn't understand how his perfect plan had fallen apart. "Isabella," he called out as the bailiffs led him toward the door. "Isabella, please, we can work this out. I love you." I stood up slowly, feeling stronger than I had in years. "No, Trevor. You loved my money. There's a difference." As the courtroom doors closed behind him, I felt Rebecca's hand on my shoulder. "It's over," she said softly. "You're free." I looked around the courtroom, at the judge who had delivered justice, at the gallery full of strangers who had witnessed Trevor's downfall, at the empty chair where my lying, cheating, stealing husband had sat just moments before. For the first time in 3 years, I could breathe again. My grandmother had always told me that a woman should never depend on anyone else for her security. She'd been right about that. But she'd also taught me something else, that sometimes, when you stand up for yourself, the universe stands up with you. Justice had been served, and it tasted sweeter than I ever imagined it could.